Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. We will start with a hearing to consider the 2020 proposed Lake County tax budget. This hearing is being held in accordance with Section 5705.30 of the Ohio Revised Code for the primary purpose of hearing endorsements and or objections to the proposed 2020 Lake County tax budget. The public hearing will be recorded. Let's see, and Madam Clerk, I believe we've done the appropriate publication for this meeting, and I believe we can waive that. So if there's no objection, we will waive the reading of that. And moving on, the Lake County Budget Director is now asked to comment on the proposed tax budget. Michael Matus, are you available, sir? Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Commissioners. How are you?
Doing well, sir. Yourself?
Good, thank you. The Finance Department has been preparing the 2022 tax budget based on the department request that we've received. I provided you a packet which includes all the estimated revenues and all the department requests for 2022. The general fund revenues estimates equal about $56.9 million, and your requests were $62.2 million. So requests exceeded revenues by $5.3 million. The tax budget for 2022 was prepared on the premise that the commissioners would only approve expenditures up to the estimated revenues for 2022 for the general fund. The funds receiving property taxes are the general fund, child welfare, Board of Developmental Disabilities, AMS Board, narcotics, crime lab, and the senior citizens levy. All of the gross mills are the same as what it was in 2001 and prior as well. And just an update on the projected revenues through May, we're right on point with our estimates for that. So the board will consider the adoption of the tax budget at the July 15th, 2022 commissioner meeting, and a copy of the proposed 2022 tax budget will be provided to the auditor's office later today.
Very good, sir. Commissioner Young, Mr. Plechnik, anything for Mike? Very good. Mike, thank you.
Thanks.
The board will now receive any written or verbal comments on the proposed tax budget. Any members of the audience are now invited to speak at this time, or if you have an agent to speak on your behalf. Do we have any takers? Very good, thank you. Let's see. Okay, the Board of County Commissioners will consider adopting the proposed 2022 Lake County tax budget at its regular meeting on Thursday, July 15, 2021 at 10 a.m. in the Commissioners' chambers. Additional written endorsements and or objections may be sent to the clerk of the Board of Lake County Commissioners, 105 Main Street, Building A, 5th floor, Suite 513, Lake County Administration Center, Painsville, Ohio, 44077 until 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. This time we will now adjourn this hearing. Moving on, thank you for joining us today for the 26th regular meeting of the Lake County Board of Commissioners. Would all those who are willing and able please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Grant us, O Lord, light to our understanding, prudence in our investigating, foresight in our planning, sincerity in our deliberating, the grace to follow truth in our judgment. Help us to be moved in our decision, neither by fear nor by self-interest, and to do our work faithfully. May we respect the authority vested in us, for thou art the source of all authority, and may we use in our directives for the common good and for thy honor and glory. Amen. Thank you all. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young. Commissioner Hamercheck.
Here. Okay, public comments. Do we have anyone in attendance wishing to address this board? Sir, Mr. Massey, please. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Commissioners. First of all, I'd like to start on a real positive note. We had a meeting with Sheriff in Falvey at my house last night, and we invited neighbors to talk about a block watch program. And I have to compliment Sheriff in Falvey. He was quite the professional, and we look forward to working.
Sheriff or deputy?
I'm sorry. Deputy, I'm sorry.
just-
Sergeant in
just-
Falvey. I just see some great horizon. I see some great things for Sergeant in Falvey.
I see, there you go.
The sheriff is not getting concerned,
I
okay?
was going to say,
Okay. Again, what the intent is, we did record the meeting, and we will publish that on Lobbyists for Citizens so that everyone in the community that's interested in the Block Watch program can benefit from what Sergeant Infalvi is saying. I went to a Lake Tran meeting last night. I don't know if you've heard about it, but they had a proposed new headquarters for $10 million. That is now, it went up to $21 million. Now it's down to 17.5. R.L. Bone, the architect, wanted an additional $250,000 because of the increase in the project. That was voted down. But I asked the question in the public comments. I said, well, how could we be so far off? I can understand a couple $100,000 or even $1 million or $2 million, but when you're 75% off, that's disconcerting to the public. And I was told that it was the first $10 million was a estimate by CT Consultants. I have, as I am always wont to do, I contacted CT Consultants, and I left a message for David Wilds to get his take on the story, and he has not returned my call. The headquarters was to be built because of the Dial-A-Ride program, as I understand in listening to the comments. That program has suffered because of the COVID-19. They expected to come back somewhat by the end of this year. Then in 2 years, they expect the program to be fully functional as it was before. The concern that I have, there's two concerns. One, to spend 17.5 on a definite maybe that it'll return is somewhat disconcerting to me. But the other, I walked away from that meeting feeling that the Lake Tran is just flush with cash, and whether it's a sales tax or governmental grants, they don't seem to bat an eye, or I should say the administrators, about going from 10 million to 17.5. They already have, as I understand from last night, they've got about 12 million already set aside for the headquarters. So Lake Tran does not suffer from any serious cash needs. I just mentioned that to the commissioners, that concerns us. I also have two things that I promised I would do, and that was I have written a records request to the Treasurer's Office on the two accounts that I mentioned that was over $6 million in taxpayer funds that need to be returned to the taxpayer. I did this morning stop by the Treasurer's Office, and I did meet a very pleasant David Blannock, first time that I've met the Chief Deputy Treasurer, and he said that one of the accounts is really the purview of the auditor's office, and he will contact the auditor's office with that records request. The second one, he says, he wanted me to understand what he was looking at. The issue on one of these accounts is that it's a legacy issue. I guess David is new to the position, and they've got a handle on the current issues of overpayment of taxes, and they get that back to the taxpayers. The problem is they've got a binder that's about that thick of old computer-generated printouts, and what I have done, rather than, again, we're always trying to help here, I have offered the services of Brian Massey, to the treasurer's office, to help them try to get this money back, try to get these things resolved. David said that he would have to talk to the prosecutor's office, but I still am very serious that we need to get the money back to the taxpayers somehow, and I know they don't have the resources in the treasurer's office, so I'm offering that assistance to them. The second item is I've got a letter to the Budget Commission. I didn't know who to drop it off to, whether it would be the treasurer or the auditor or the prosecutor's office. I started with the treasurer's office, and they suggested that I give it to the commissioners. So I will give you, at the end of the meeting, this letter to the Budget Commission, and what I want to do is I want the Budget Commission to justify the $64 million in financial reserves for Deepwood.
At the risk of playing hot potato, if I may ask legal a question, if you could.
Absolutely.
Since the Board of Commissioners has no authority over the Budget Commission, are we the appropriate body to accept such correspondence?
Well, I would say this, you're correct, you have no authority over the Budget Commission. It's
Your microphone, sir.
Is it on?
There you go.
Sorry,
it was kind of...
Yes, this board has no authority over the Budget Commission. However, it's up to the board if the board wants to accept the letter from Mr. Massey.
Okay, Madam Clerk, are you comfortable routing it to the appropriate parties?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay.
Mr. President?
Sir.
If I could do the same, Mr. Massey, your question about the unclaimed overpayment of property taxes, I think, is very important, because we have somewhere on the order of $5 million sitting there.
It's
$6 million sitting there. That is not in the hands of the taxpayer who rightly owns it, nor is it being productively used as sort of a monument to past treasurers' failure to refund the money. And our first goal is certainly to return it to the rightful owners, but I know that all efforts are being made by the treasurer's office to do that. But nonetheless, some of these taxpayers may be deceased, there may be no way to refund the money, and in that case, after due diligence is done, one would hope that it could be used productively in another way. So I did pose your question to our assistant prosecutor, Dave Hackman, and I'd like him to share, if he might, the legal procedure that we have to go through, assuming that after all due diligence is done, and the treasurer's office is still working on some of the accounts and monies in question, but assuming with respect to a particular overpayment that all due diligence is done and there is no reasonable way to repay it, what can we do to try to repurpose that money so it's spent on behalf of all the taxpayers of Lake County, as opposed to perpetually sitting in an account gaining 0.05% interest?
Agree 100%.
Sharing that potential solution, Mr. Hackman?
Yes, Commissioner. Mr. Massey, what we need to do, and I think you know this based on listening to you earlier, we need to have due diligence done to find these people who paid the monies in. And my understanding is this goes back to the mid-1980s. So that an exhaustive search needs to be performed, proper due diligence, and then after that, potentially we could move to unclaimed funds through a court order. That's what we're considering right now, but it's the tracking down of these folks going back.
I understand, and that's why I'm saying, just as a concerned citizen, I'm willing to help. If it is legally possible that I do that, I'm willing to provide that assistance. I know something about numbers, so.
Yeah, this is the first I've heard of your involvement today, or your office.
It really was just today.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
I do have one.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Young.
As far as you know, Brian, what's and you as well, Assistant Prosecutor, what procedures have been followed in the past to locate these people? Is there a process established here in Lake County, or do we just, when we hear about things of this sort, do we just go out and try to make things happen? Or is there a annual is that part of our annual activities? On July 1st, we'll begin to send out mailers to the unclaimed funds holders throughout the county, et cetera. How does that work?
Commissioner, I can't speak to the exact process. However, I can say this. It's my understanding that there was a new software installed, I want to say 3 years ago, where the typical scenario where this has happened is where an individual pays their own property tax, not knowing that their mortgage company is also paying the property tax. And now that we have the new software, it's identified and rectified in that fashion. The problem is going back going back to the mid-'80s.
That's my understanding. It's a legacy issue, and looking very briefly today at what David showed me, it certainly appeared that there were chances to, or there were opportunities that we went out and tried to find the people, and they made some entries, next to the, it's a binder this large, it's huge. So the problem is the sheer volume of individual transactions, and as Mr. Hackman says, trying to find some of these people, it goes back into the 1980s, it may be just physically impossible to do it, but I'm just saying, well, if that's impossible, then we need to some other legal procedures to say, let's clean out that account and do what is appropriate with it.
Is that just, not to belabor this, but just one other question. Is there, that's simply one component of the problem, isn't it? That people who attempted to pay their property taxes and failed one way or another, or it already had been paid by the mortgage company. Is that just one minor component of these folks' unclaimed funds? Or are there other major categories as well of people that have money sitting in those accounts?
Commissioner, what I would say to that is I believe it is the main component for the surplus fund over the years. I don't know that there's any other instances or issues where somehow money's got into that fund that shouldn't have been. I think it's the classic taxpayer paying their own property taxes and mortgage company sending in the taxes as well. And prior to the software that was implemented within the last few years, that obviously became problematic.
Yeah, that's my understanding also on the problem.
So people would pay twice through the mortgage company and their own resources, and yet we never caught it here at the county level?
That's my understanding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you, sir. Okay, does anyone else in the audience wish to address the board? Thank you. Jason Boyd, County Administrator, do we have any electronic submissions?
We do not.
Jason Boyd indicating none. Thank you. Madam Clerk, moving on to resolutions. First resolution, please.
In the Engineer's Office, resolution authorizing the Lake County Engineer to make application with the Ohio Public Works Commission for emergency funding for the Callow Road Bridge failure in Leroy Township and to execute an OPWC agreement funding emergency repairs to alleviate the threat to public safety.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion. County Engineer Jim Gills.
Yeah, yes, Commissioner. This is a project that we've been sitting on for about 9 months, waiting for the 1st of July to come by. This project is one that was eligible for emergency funds through Public Works. We did make application, and they immediately approved it for $450,000. We will match that with $450,000, and we will rebuild the bridge.
Very good. Further discussion? Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
In the Utilities Department, resolution approving final estimate number 3, release of retainage in the amount of $13,199.20 with D&M Painting Corporation and accepting a 3-year maintenance bond in the amount of $31,108 for River Road 250,000-gallon elevated water storage tank painting improvement, alternate 1B, 1B add, and items 2 through 5, project 437W for the Lake County Department of Utilities.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion. Randy, pretty straightforward.
It is, yeah. This just closes out that project. It was completed satisfactorily and puts it into a maintenance period of 3 years.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Further discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution increasing appropriations and transferring cash within Lake County Department of Utilities Water Operating Fund and Project Fund 595, Orchard Road Waterline Replacement Project 432W.
Move.
Go ahead.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? Randy, anything you want to add to that?
This is just funding, moving money into the fund so we can present a resolution to award the contract at our next meeting.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution awarding a bid contract to Core and Main LP for fittings, repair parts, service equipment, and tools, Exhibit A for the Lake County Department of Utilities.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution awarding a bid contract to Windwater of Akron for fittings, repair parts, service equipment, and tools, Exhibit B for the Lake County Department of Utilities.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution awarding a bid contract to Ferguson Enterprises LLC for fittings, repair parts, service equipment, and tools, Exhibit C for the Lake County Department of Utilities.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
And Job and Family Services Department, resolution approving Lake County Department of Job and Family Services vouchers, date of warrant July 9, 2021, in the amount of $117,236.82.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
In the Commissioner's Office, resolution authorizing payment to various Lake County Police prosecutors for the first half of 2021.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution reappointing Andrew L. Meinhold to the Lake County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board for a 4-year term commencing July 1st, 2021.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution appointing Curtis C. Lau to the Lake County Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board for a 4-year term commencing July 1st, 2021.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution authorizing the Lake County Administrator to execute an agreement with Lake Tech Communications Incorporated for the Lake County Emergency Management Agency.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
And the Finance Department, resolution approving payment of bills as listed on the Commissioner's Approval Journal in the amount of $447,833.29.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution approving purchase orders as listed on the Commissioner's Purchase Order Approval Journal in the amount of $2,500,675.69.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution increasing appropriations for various non-general fund accounts.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes.
Resolution transferring appropriations within various general and non-general fund accounts.
Move to approve.
Second.
Discussion? None being heard, Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes. Okay, this brings us to our departmental reports portion of our meeting. Utilities, Randy?
Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to report that materials continue to be in short supply and varying price. Report recently and it's confirmed with the suppliers and the contractors that prices are only good for about 7 days. So we're trying to get bidders to give us some prices that the contract won't go into actually executed for 45 days, 30 to 45 days, and they've got a price that's only good for 7 days. So so far the prices that we've been getting for projects are good. It's been very competitive, but it is an issue that could be an issue coming up.
So material cost and availability still continues to be a very real issue.
It is, absolutely, yeah.
Very good. Anything further for Randy?
Mr. President,
Sir.
how does the water tower look with the new paint job?
It looks excellent. It's a water tower at River Road and in Madison Perry border, right on the border there. You can see it from the freeway. And I think it looks very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that the Apache Trail?
It is it.
Gotcha. Thank you. Very good. Job and Family Services. Suzanne?
No report today, Commissioners.
Thank you, ma'am. Let's see. Lake County Commissioner Jason Boyd.
We're promoting everyone today. There's sheriffs and commissioners.
Lake County Administrator. Wow.
No, thank you.
So basically, ladies and gentlemen, if it wasn't for Jennifer and Jason, there's, and then we got Kathy as the backup crew.
Yeah, no thank you for that. Good morning, Commissioners. Just very briefly, we had mayors and managers meeting yesterday, hosted at the EOC. It was refreshing to see all our leaders back at the EOC. I think it's been the better part of a year and a half since we've all gathered there. Health Commissioner Ron Graham and Joe Busher were there to kind of give an update on where we are with COVID, and obviously, we're rounding third, headed home here. Just paraphrasing Ron Graham, the county is back open for business. This weekend we'll have quite a few 4th of July celebrations throughout the county. They've approved just a number of community events. All in all, Ron thinks we're in a really, really good spot here in Lake County as far as our vaccine, our response, our businesses, etc. And finally, just briefly for the clerk, the correspondence from Mr. Massey should probably begin with the county auditor as the secretary of the Budget Commission. And that concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you. Is there any questions for our administrator?
Mr. President?
Sir.
I think it needs to be noted that the health commissioner began his presentation by thanking the commissioners, in particular President Hammercheck, for working with the governor's office to prevent our mobile clinic from being transferred to Cuyahoga County. We were able to acquire the mobile clinic so that we can use that not only with respect to COVID-19, but future vaccinations, health crises, the need to visit residents at home who are homebound. So we have a long-term asset for the county because President Hammercheck and the Commissioner's Office were able to acquire this asset. Commissioner Young and myself joined the President to actually, I wouldn't say tour, but observe the mobile clinic and its use earlier, and we were able to work together and get it done. But I think it's a really significant achievement for Lake County that we were able to keep this asset from being transferred out and continue to use it with our health commissioner.
Well, thank you, and I do want to thank Commissioner Young and you, Commissioner Pleshnik, for supporting my efforts there, and I'd also like to thank our prosecutor's office for helping make sure that all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted and everything was being done in accordance with applicable laws. So it was a true team effort. Health Commissioner Graham was a pleasure yet again to work with, and his team at the Health District were very supportive in making this happen. So we are continuing to serve the people of Lake County. So with that, thank you. Jason, anything further?
No, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Madam Clerk.
Yes, I wanted to mention that the next commissioners meeting is going to be next week, Thursday, July 8th at 10 a.m. And I also wanted to mention that county offices will be closed on Monday in observance of Independence Day.
Very good. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, moving on to legal.
No reports, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir. Okay, do we have any old business to come before this board? Any old business, sir?
Mr. President, a couple of items. I had the opportunity, along with our county administrator, Jason Boyd, to visit the Lake County Executive Airport, better known as Lost Nation Airport. It was good to see from the airport manager's perspective, Patty Fulop, how the airport was functioning. It was reported to me that we're getting an average of 1 noise complaint a month, which I find to be remarkably low. I spent nearly 5 years in the Airport Noise Abatement Council for the Cuyahoga County Airport representing Willoughby Hills, and it was rare that we had less than 10, 20 noise complaints a month. So for us to be operating at that level really speaks, I think, to the service and the kindness of the staff at the airport, because planes are just as noisy in Willoughby as they are in Richmond Heights and Willoughby Hills, but I think having a really understanding staff who works with residents and does everything they can to hear their concerns and be responsive goes a long way towards building a good working relationship and being a good neighbor. In addition, although we still do subsidize the airport to some extent, that subsidy has lowered over the years. It's about $100,000 a year. In my experience, most airports operate at a much larger deficit, and given that ODOT estimates that there's about a $10 million annualized benefit to the local economy, the fact that we're putting in $100,000 to get $10 million back is really pretty remarkable, and Manager Fulop has worked very hard to have most of the airport's reconstruction and maintenance paid for through FAA grants. So I think we have a very successful team working at the airport there, and it was good to see that firsthand. The other item of business that I wanted to raise is we've had several of the township trustees reach out to us with respect to the issue of law enforcement, sheriff's patrols. Obviously, it's critical that we have a safe and strong Lake County, and we certainly do support police and law enforcement. So it's very concerning when we look at the issue of many of the townships have very low deputy staffing, and talking with our sheriff, he certainly expressed the concern that there's insufficient numbers of deputies that are patrolling in the townships. When you compare similarly sized cities and villages, there's considerably more full-time officers. I think looking to Wade Hill, I think they have 7 full-time officers, including their police chief. And I think Concord and Painsville Township have about 7 deputies. And I don't think I need to tell anyone here that Wade Hill is considerably smaller than either Concord or Painsville Township, that approach 17 and 19,000 residents each. So it's a very real issue, and it's something that we have to look to as a county and as individual municipalities. How do we address this? When we initially had concerns brought to us by Painsville Township, I know that the commissioners looked to the general fund, and the conclusion in talking with the sheriff and our budget director, Mike Matus, is there was not a significant amount of resources available for the county to subsidize deputies for the townships. Nonetheless, we look to, and I'll let the president talk about this, potentially providing a grant program to kind of build a bridge for the townships to have some number of years where the deputies could be subsidized by the county with a commitment that they would pay for them going forward. I was reached out to by trustee Carl Dondorfer from Concord and trustee Gabe Cicconetti from Painsville Township, and they asked to have a meeting with the commissioners. I told them you can have a meeting with any one of the commissioners, but 2 or more is a quorum, and we can't have public meetings outside the sunshine. So they said, well, you're as good as any commissioner, I suppose. So I had the meeting. With Trustee Dondorfer and Trustee Cicconetti to talk about their concerns. And in particular, Trustee Cicconetti said that he would rather have deputies that are fully paid for by the county indefinitely than have a grant program, which is certainly understandable. I'd rather have, a permanent subsidy than a 4-year subsidy. And he suggested, instead of having multiple deputies for a temporary period of time, having 1 deputy for 12 years or perhaps indefinitely, and suggested that the clerk of court's office might be willing to pay for deputies indefinitely for the townships. I said I couldn't make representations on behalf of the clerk of court's office, but that I would bring back the concerns expressed. Another concern that the trustees expressed, in particular Trustee Cicconetti, is that from time to time when a an event occurs in another township, the deputies that Painsville Township pays for with their property tax levy will go to another township. This is of course the consequence of mutual aid. Sometimes your police officers or deputies go to another township or city, and in turn, if you have a crisis, then deputies or police officers will come to your city. I did inform Trustee Cicconetti that that's a matter of contract, and that if they find it problematic that their deputies are leaving Painsville Township to go to other municipalities, we can alter their contract. But of course, the consequence would be if you don't participate with the other townships in mutual aid, it's very unlikely that they'd be willing to participate with you in mutual aid. So I wanted to, as best I could, represent the counter proposal or the request on behalf of the trustees, Trustee Cicconetti, Trustee Dondorfer, which was they would prefer to have one deputy added, paid for by the county indefinitely, than have a temporary grant program. Now, obviously, that presents different challenges because the clerk of courts, as I explained, has a fund that doesn't automatically replenish itself. It's really one-time money, it's not recurrent. And so making a permanent commitment might not be possible given that that's a limited pool of money, and when it's gone, it's gone. But nonetheless, even expressing that concern, I wanted to, as best I could, represent the request that was made, that the townships would be willing to add, at least it was represented to me that Concord and Painsville townships would be willing to add one deputy at their expense if the county would indefinitely pay for one deputy at our expense out of the clerk of courts funds. And once again, I said I don't speak for the clerk of courts and I don't speak for the full county commission, which is why we're having this meeting. It's legal for one commissioner to meet and have a conversation. But I wanted to pass this forward because I pledged and promised to both of the trustees that I would do so.
This is the part where I take a deep breath. Thank you. That's wow. That's a lot of information. Well, let's do a little bit of history here. So earlier this year, trustees Josh Pennock, oh good heavens, terrible with names here. Chuck Hillier reached out to I believe at least Commissioner Young and myself, possibly you, and just looking for subsidies from the county regarding sheriff's coverage. The conversation was words to the effect of, we have about a $54 million budget, percentage-wise, contributing deputies would be a very small percentage. Obviously, I circled directly to the offer of, hey, come take a look at our budget, work with us. If you see something that could be trimmed, that could be reallocated, we'll talk. In the interest of time, I won't go into all the details, but it was pretty much pointed out that they trust Mike Matus, our budget and finance director. They were satisfied that I've been on top of the budget regularly, that they doubted that they could find anything that Mike or myself haven't been able to identify. So although we have a multi-million-dollar budget, we are very conscious and aware and stay within the confines of available funds, which I thought was encouraging. But he did offer up of, hey, I will make a diligent effort to find out if there are any state or federal grant programs. The model that I was looking for is the old COPS program. This goes back about 10, 15 years, but that had to do with the federal government paying for more officers on the street and doing the daily stuff. I did have a very encouraging conversation with our clerk of courts, Faith Andrews, who was more than willing to work with us within the confines of the law. And I have to emphasize within the confines of law because no grant could be outside the term of the contract. The contract being 4 years, it has to stay within that. You can't encumber future clerks, future boards. There are legal limitations as to what we can do. Future sheriffs. So having something going on beyond that specific period of time would not be supported by available law. I will say Faith Andrews, being true to her name, Faith, gave a great deal of hope that we could build a bridge between where the townships are today and where they need to be. I say bridge and I say townships plural, but we are in current contract negotiations with Painsville Township, so it was proper to look at Painsville Township as a pilot program and limit the discussion to that. Obviously looking out to Concord Township, Perry Township, Leroy Township. I'm specifically not mentioning Madison Township because they have taken the initiative to have their own police department that is fully funded and supported by at least one, possibly two tax levies that I'm aware of. Faith Andrews was a good partner in this. She's a strong believer in funding, funding law enforcement and making sure that that is a key element in economic development, because I know that's something near and dear to all three of us. You're not going to have economic development in a community that does not have a safe environment for the people to live and work and raise a family. Kind of like schools, you need a good quality school system if you want to have a growing community and a safe place. So that kind of eliminates the 12-year possibility. So I'm kind of checking off boxes here. Mutual aid, I certainly wouldn't want to see Painsville Township or Concord or any of our townships turn into East Cleveland. That God forbid that would ever happen. The notion that when an officer needs additional assistance, the thought that somebody's going to be denied over some contractual, I'm pretty sure there's going to be plenty of officers who would ignore that contract and they would respond to render aid and support to their fellow officers. Consequences be damned. How's that? So I'm a little shocked that that would even be a part of a conversation. Just so I'm clear, was Trustee Dondorfer in the same conversation, or you spoke to these two individually or together?
I spoke to everyone together, and I want to be clear, the issue that was raised is that Trustee Cicconetti expressed concern that he's paying for deputies that get called to other townships, and that should be the responsibility of the county in his view, and that he should not have to pay for deputies that are going to other townships, because the county is required by law to be the responding authority to emergencies, and he views that as falling within the county's expense.
Well, perhaps, I'll leave that one be for the moment. The principle of mutual aid is if there's an event in, let's use Painsville Township, they could count on Mentor, Painsville, Perry Village, Perry Township, I believe even Madison Township. And I'm just familiar with routine traffic and activities, the Sheriff's Office, Highway Patrol. If there is an incident requiring additional manpower, they're going to get it. Likewise, if there's an event or a situation elsewhere in the county, those resources go to where the need is. Usually that is something of significance. It's not, we're going to call mutual aid for a barking dog. I'm trying to be polite here, but I'm stunned to be hearing this, that someone with as many years of service as Trustee Cicconetti that doesn't seem to understand what mutual aid is. Wow, and Trustee Dondorfer, now Chief Dondorfer, with 25 years of experience at the Sheriff's Office, was in this conversation. Not to put you on the spot, but did Trustee Dondorfer explain what mutual aid is? Did he give any
He did.
discomfort here with what was being said?
Well, he certainly explained the value of mutual aid, and I think that everyone acknowledges it. I think that Trustee Cicconetti was trying to make a financial argument that, in his view, mutual aid should be paid for by the county, not by Painsville Township.
Okay, well, let's switch to funding opportunities. We made a diligent effort. We as a board have worked closely with Faith Andrews Courts to put a grant program together that would be a bridge, cover true costs of additional deputies. We do a grant, they provide a deputy, an incentive to get them where they need to be. I believe we offered Painsville Township 3 additional deputies, assuming they would put 3 up. Looking forward to Concord, it would be essentially, I believe the discussions with the sheriff was about the same, so it would be a total of 12 additional deputies. They would still be below typical staffing for the populations given. Speaking of populations, we have townships in Lake County that are bigger than most of our cities, and they're definitely bigger than every village. The average cost per call for other communities is in the neighborhood of $200 per call, and I believe the sheriff's office cost to the townships is below $50 per call. So you want to talk about the best deal in town, the townships are really getting a tremendous deal working with the sheriff. I do know that in recent days, the townships had previously been excluded from, I believe, the American Recovery Act, the ARP money, but that has now changed. The townships are now going to be participating in that. Those dollars are not additional, they were just redistributed from the cities to the townships. And I believe Painsville Township is scheduled to get well over $1 million. Perhaps we could work with our trustees and the Trustees Association. We could also do like we did before when the original guidance came out from the original COVID dollars. Work to loosen some guardrails so that they could use that for law enforcement, maybe to help an additional bridge. You know, they're getting money that they did not expect to get, they'd hoped to get. Maybe we could work with them to appropriate those dollars. This is a situation that needs to be taken seriously. We can't be playing let's make a deal. I'm not trying to be flippant here. I'm trying to be very focused that if you want to have a strong, safe community, you have to give the same attention to law enforcement that you're giving to roads, that you're giving to fire, that you're giving to EMS. And our townships have historically been very good at taking care of the roads, fire, and EMS. And when it comes to law enforcement, it's somebody else's problem. I think we need to define what a reasonable person would call an emergency. A barking dog, a neighbor complaint is not an emergency. Disorderly conduct may not be an emergency, but it could lead to one. And that's where having deputies on routine patrol tends to back things down, be a moderating influence. That's where having officers in the neighborhoods back that down. Just simple traffic control, just being present, safer neighborhoods. The benefits, I could go on at length, but I don't know. I think maybe we should be encouraging our colleagues in the township to take a look at the monies that are on the way. I'm open to any thoughts that you two might have here to help with this. Commissioner Young, your thoughts?
I
know this is a lot.
I don't think anything that's said so far is necessarily contradictory to one another. I think this can all be worked out. I am apprehensive about using one-time federal money. I'm apprehensive about it. I'm not necessarily diametrically opposed to it. I had a situation when I was in the legislature where just after the housing market collapse, the previous administration, the previous General Assembly had spent billions of dollars of federal money to make the budget work. And of course then the new General Assembly came in and we had something like a $10 billion hole in the budget that we had to fill because the money just wasn't there anymore from the feds. This is a little bit different with faith involved in this way and committed. I have absolute faith in her commitments would be followed through with, but at the same time, that's not really our money. And that money can vary, its availability can vary. So I'm a little bit apprehensive about budgeting based upon that flow of funds. But at the same time, Commissioner Hamercheck, you're absolutely right. Law enforcement is just as important as any other service that's necessary for our communities to thrive, if not more important than others. So I think the grant program is something that the townships should be taking a very close look at. I think it's a reasonable program. And I'd like to talk more about it directly with them at some point. But it's in the final analysis, it's their decision, and we have to respect their decision. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Sir.
if I could follow on, I agree with Commissioner Young. It would be, in my view, somewhat irresponsible to look at one-time monies as a source for indefinite funding for sheriff deputies. I know in talking with Sheriff Liam Bruno, he feels very strongly that we need to be able to give a substantial commitment to someone that we bring into the sheriff's office. It's not fair to hire someone and let them go the next day. So the grant program, I think, balances those realities by giving a 4-year term, which the prosecutor's office confirms complies with the law, which gives the townships time to find other funding sources to provide for those deputies long term, and gives kind of a bridge to the future. I think we acknowledge it doesn't solve the issue, but when we initially had, and I will say that Trustee Hillier and Trustee Pennock from Painsville Township did reach out to me as well initially. When we initially had the request for help, we looked at the general fund budget very carefully. And as well as it's managed, as carefully as we balance it, there isn't millions of additional dollars to provide substantial new sheriff's coverage in that budget. We would have to make pretty dramatic cuts, and it's hard to see how that could be justified when, as I said to Trustees Cicconetti and Trustee Dondorfer, even as the townships are saying we need help, we have the villages and cities who are looking at their ARP funding being cut nearly in half as it's being divided between themselves and the townships, and asking the question of what additional help will we receive from the county too. It's very hard to justify spending county dollars in one area of the county when the entire county pays for it. And so when you're asking for a service that directly benefits one township, I think Commissioner Young and I agree, taxes are not our friend. We don't like raising taxes, but when you have to raise revenue, it should come from the community that directly benefits from its expenditure as nearly as you can. That's fairness. Folks in Wade Hill shouldn't be paying for folks in Concord. Folks in Concord shouldn't be paying for folks in Wade Hill. When we make expenditures on behalf of the county as best as we can, we should be benefiting the entire county and distributing the funds accordingly. So I do think in the long term, the townships have to find a way to pay for the officer coverage, for the deputy coverage that they need. At the same time, I'm really grateful to the clerk of court's office for being willing to provide this grant program, working with the commissioners, working with the townships, and I agree with Commissioner Young. It's something that each township should review carefully because it's an opportunity to dramatically increase their coverage for a 4-year period, which gives them time to explore how they can afford that coverage going forward. I'm very sympathetic to the concerns that we heard yesterday at mayors and managers from the villages and cities that were anticipating considerably more support from the federal government and are seeing their funding cut substantially, even as I'm very pleased that the townships are getting a large amount of support that they weren't anticipating. But it just reinforces that we have to be as careful and fair as possible, recognizing that a lot of our villages and cities thought they were going to have considerably more funding going into this and next year, when in reality the townships are going to be the beneficiary of that added funding as opposed to the cities. That may or may not be available for additional coverage, but I think we can take some optimism that when the smoke clears, they may be able to use some of that money for law enforcement as well, because the CARES Act began with very narrow guardrails and it ultimately did expand to include law enforcement. I will share that I had the opportunity to go to a breakfast yesterday with Congressman Joyce and Senator Rob Portman, and in the Q&A I immediately raised my hand and said, our county engineer often says with some chagrin that infrastructure no longer includes buildings, bridges, and roads. Are we working on that issue? And Senator Portman replied that he had actually posed this question directly to Senator Manchin, who essentially wrote the infrastructure provisions in the American Rescue Plan and expressed just that concern. And the furthest he could push him at the time was to include water and sewer as well as broadband. But that Senator Portman continues to work to expand those guardrails, and the advice that his office has been giving to municipalities and counties like us is they have some optimism that the definition of infrastructure should and ultimately probably will broaden, hopefully to include what we would traditionally consider to be infrastructure, like roads and bridges and buildings. That would be of great help to Lake County. But as they're working to expand how the money can be spent so that we really do have local control and we're not, as a federal government, being told what to do locally, the advice I was given, the advice that I'll pass back to the Board of Commissioners from Portman's office is, given that we have until 2024 to commit the funding, whether it would be a township, a village, a city, or a county, we should wait a little while longer before we make those major commitments, because that definition of infrastructure, that definition of what we can legally spend the money on may well expand. And when the CARES Act expanded, it did include law enforcement. So I think the grant program is a valuable tool to build in time for townships to evaluate how to pay for the additional coverage that I absolutely agree with Trustee Cicconetti, Trustee Dondorfer, Trustees Hillier and Pennock. They need more deputy coverage. When Wade Hill has as much coverage as Painsville Township or Concord, they clearly do need more officers on the street. I don't think anyone can reasonably disagree with their concern. The question is, as it always comes down to, as trustee, how do you pay for that? And I'm glad that as a county we are able to offer them some help, and hopefully we can lobby hard for them that they'll be able to use this pretty substantial windfall coming from the ARP to help with this problem as well. And I hope that all the commissioners will be calling our congressmen and senators and making that request forcefully, because it'll help the county, but it'll also help the townships in this important regard.
I would agree. Standing shoulder to shoulder with our trustees is important, and I think we've demonstrated good faith. Speaking once again of Faith Andrews, just to put things into perspective, the grant program that Faith Andrews was prepared to support within the confines of the contract would be $375,000 per year for 4 years. That's $1.5 million. If that's not a good faith offer to our townships, I don't know what is. That's a bridge. Based on the monies that the townships are receiving, I would hope that they would work along with their trustees association and all the other resources, as we did in the past, to loosen up those guardrails and commit those dollars. As Commissioner Young pointed out, a lot of short-sighted activities, one-time monies being used. That's never a good thing, but this builds that bridge to get towards proper funding. I believe it's achievable. Hopefully our trustees. Sheriff, did you want to comment on any of this? You're smack dab in the middle of this, or have we pretty much said all that needed to be said? I get nervous when the sheriff smiles, just so you know.
No comment.
Thank you, sir. There we go.
It's a difficult subject because costs are a big part of government. You've made excellent points. 2 of our townships are larger than most of our cities in Lake County. If you looked at Painsville Township, since this is the issue, currently Painsville Township funds 6 deputies. They have 20,000 residents and probably about 1,600 calls for service a month. We have a city in Lake County that's 9,500 people. They have 17 police officers. We have a city, another township that's 18,000 people about, and they have 21 police officers that patrol that. We have Painsville Township's about 20,000 people. We have a city that's 24,000 people about, and they have 44 police officers on patrol. So it is an issue. It's difficult. Citizens expect not only a presence on their streets, they expect somebody responding, they expect all these different things, which they should, and the more police presence there are, the safer the community. The safer the community, the more people want to live there, build businesses there, establish their families. So it's a big factor. I do want to point out, at least to the public, the commissioners do a lot of funding for not only township policing, but for the county as well, that aren't taken into effect. I said the building. When you look at paying just for a police officer, well, the police officer needs to be in a building somewhere. There's costs, there's heating, electricity, the building upkeep. There is the cost of computers. It's a very technological environment today, so paying for software. The software for a jail management system, a records management system for policing, and a CAD system for dispatching is about $2 million. That's being funded by the county. That doesn't come from nowhere, and those aren't being taken into respect in terms of offsetting the costs for policing in the townships. As well, the commissioners currently pay for 2 deputies to respond to emergencies in the county. But that's not 1 square mile, that's not 5, that's 88 square miles. There's about 55,000 residents that live in those areas that the commissioners are offsetting some of that cost. Additionally, there's a detective bureau that's not counted into those numbers that investigates major crimes. When you look at a police officer on the street, people often forget, well, they also have to be in court. They also have to do follow-ups and not just respond to a crime, but then they need to do a follow-up. Painsville Township had a shooting about a week ago where a man was shot in the head in Painsville Township. Fortunately, he's doing okay. But we have a lot of investigation going up, trying to follow up on leads. Where do those people come when you're only paying for 1 person on patrol? Do they leave patrol? Do they go and do those investigations? And when the call comes in and says, hey, someone's robbing my house or my store, we'll be there in a couple days, we're doing investigations on the side. It doesn't work. So there is a lot that goes into policing. And so I'm not asking for a township such as Painsville Township to be at 44 police officers. That's not what this is about. This is saying, well, we do need more than 6. And I want to reiterate, you can't count, as Commissioner Young, as Commissioner Plechnik have said, on monies that are out there that may not be there tomorrow because they failed. In an earlier jail conversation, I talked about rented jail space. And I said you can't count on rented jail space, but I did say there is an associate county that is close to signing a contract for $4 million on rented bed space. I said that can go away. That did go away. That went to another county. So the $4 million they expected to come into that county in rented bed space is now gone. You can't rely on money that is there today and may be gone tomorrow. There are consistent costs related to government, and part of that is policing.
While you're here, Sheriff, we could discuss staffing per shift. Compare and contrast. Roads, that's typically 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's 1 shift. Fire is typically a 24-hour shift, 1 person. But in law enforcement, you can have an 8-hour shift, a 10-hour shift, a 12-hour shift, but you need to have multiple people. So although, for example, sticking with Painsville Township, although they have 6 deputies, those 6 deputies are not all on shift at the same time. There's a rotation.
No, that's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. There's still people there on holidays. It's not shutting down at midnight. Certainly, when you look at those staffing, to average one person per shift, 24 hours a day, is about 5 people to do that. To account for holidays, vacations, that would be 1 8-hour day, 7 days a week. You need about 5 people to do that. So if you take that 6 deputies, you're pretty much covering 1 shift a day, 7 days a week. What about the other, 16 hours of each day?
And call volume. Painsville Township, they have their challenges. It's being addressed, but there are challenges that are growing in particularly certain areas. And is it fair to say that as a management technique, you are rotating your deputies through, so there's not one deputy always assigned to be in Painsville Township, always getting whooped on, always having to deal with running to particular calls. You kind of rotate your crew through, so you're not burning your people out. I'm trying to find a
That's
way
correct.
to say that.
That's correct. And we have 4 different townships. Concord and Painsville, 20,000 people. You have probably about 9,500 in Perry Township, and roughly, about 3,500 in Leroy. Certainly the calls for service, but Leroy residents also expect the sheriff's office to be out there patrolling their neighborhoods when possible, responding to calls out there. And you're talking about quite a wide distance, so you may be a deputy out in Leroy and your backup may be 15 minutes away. It's different when you're in a city and your backup's 2 minutes away with 3 cars or 4 cars. So each township's different in terms of what we need for patrol.
And given your recommendation to the township of adequate staffing, we're still below other communities similarly situated as far as totals. Again, using Madison Township as an example.
Probably a third of where other jurisdictions of those sizes are at. We're about a third of the officer requirement.
Well, let's hope that our friends in the township, the trustees, see how generous this offer is, and hopefully they'll take us up on it. Have you gotten any feedback as of yet, or Commissioner Pleshnik, you were the only one who anybody reached out to?
No, I've not heard from anybody.
Mr. President?
Sir.
A couple of questions for the sheriff. So what the trustees, what specifically Trustee Cicconetti and Trustee Dondorfer suggested was that they would pay for 1 additional deputy if the clerk of courts would indefinitely pay for another, which would essentially be 2 additional deputies for each township. Obviously, more is better, but in your opinion, would that really be sufficient to add 2 additional deputies to Concord, 2 to Painsville? Would that solve the staffing issue there?
Certainly, any additional staffing would help, but if you added, if Painsville Township did 1 and the county did 1, that would be 8. It's not the perfect number, but at a minimum, I see them having to be at 12. So you're still 4 under and hoping that will come from somewhere.
So while it's certainly helpful to have more, really to address the issue, you're proposing a minimum of 12 for Painsville, and how many for Concord? Have we looked at 12?
I would say if you ask me what would be perfect, 24.
Yeah.
What would be workable, 12 in each of those jurisdictions.
Well, certainly if you're looking at comparable sized jurisdictions, then you're looking at more along the lines of 25 to 40 if you're looking at the cities and villages. And they pay for it, as President Hamercheck said. You know, folks who live in villages like you or cities like me are paying closer to $200-300 per call because they have a much larger police department. But at a certain point, safety becomes a necessity, and I think we're approaching that as the townships. I mean, I think they've done an incredible job with economic development, encouraging more people to come out, but with a bigger population, there's always going to be a bigger need for policing and law enforcement. So hearing that, you know, an additional deputy, while any increase is positive, wouldn't get up to what our sheriff's office recommends as the bare minimum, I would echo Commissioner Young in saying I think that this grant program is something the townships need to look at seriously as a bridge to reaching the minimums that our sheriff has proposed. And I want to say for the record that I will certainly advocate hard for the townships to be able to use their American Recovery Plan money, which they've just now heard they're receiving, to help fund law enforcement as well. And while that too is one-time money, it helps, I think, to have a bridge to get where they need to be. Just as cities have had to work hard to find the money for their police departments, I know Willoughby Hills has struggled with that. And we had a major income tax increase when I first moved to Willoughby Hills for safety forces, for police and fire. This is a struggle that every municipality goes through. And I want to say for the record that I absolutely support Painsville Township and Concord Township in that struggle. But it won't be easy. The reality is you have to find a way to pay for it. And there are only two ways. To lose weight, you either exercise or you diet. Neither is fun. To find additional funding, you either raise taxes or you cut spending, neither of which is easy work to do. So I certainly want to work with our townships to help find that money. But in the meanwhile, I want to say a big thank you to our sheriff for helping them to see what the reasonable numbers of coverage are. And thank you to our clerk of courts, who's expressed a willingness to fund this grant program that will allow our townships time to find the answer. 4 years is a period of time to find where that additional money can come from, whether it's from finding tax savings in their budget or, you know, raising additional revenues. And I want to work with our clerk of courts to make that grant program available. I want to work with our sheriff to help the townships to understand what their law enforcement needs really are. But I recognize it's not easy, and I understand why they're looking for federal, state, and county help, because it's critically important that we increase our deputy coverage, that we increase our support for law enforcement in the townships.
Last two comments. We're trying to push more information out to our citizens so they can see for themselves the numbers that we're working at. So if you want to look at townships, the number of calls and the types of calls, you can go to our website under townships and go to each township, and it will show you the monthly call volume under each township, and also the types of calls we are responding to in those particular jurisdictions. So those are, so you can get a better accurate picture going back. Probably the last 10 years are listed there in terms of township statistics. The last point I want to point out, and this is not taken into account in terms of policing numbers, I just spoke to the national sheriffs in Phoenix and said, the issue with policing today is training, and that's more common training to the line officer. Often the line officer comes out of the academy, and that's the last time they see training. Supervision sees it, how to lead, but the line officer does not get as much training, and we have to push that training down by referencing, for instance, case law that comes out of the Supreme Court or out of the Sixth Circuit for us. Here's an incident that happened. Here's how people responded. Here's how the courts have said you did it right or you did it wrong. And here's how you need to have that in the back of your mind when responding to a crowd incident, a domestic violence, a shooting, what have you. That type of training is invaluable, yet training gets pushed to the side because of cost often, because, well, there's not enough money, we gotta have people out there, so we will do away with training. Training is the one thing that shouldn't be cut. But training needs to be taken into account in terms of staffing numbers.
Well said, agreed. Thank you,
Thank you.
Sheriff. And I think it bears repeating from our discussion earlier of our 2022 tax budget. Again, the public has a right to hear this. Department requests exceeded estimated revenues by $5,370,124.92. We've had to say no to those requests because the revenues just are not there. So when we hear a very simple request of, well, it's only such a small percentage of your total budget, we have accounted for these dollars. I also think it bears out that our local government funds, 89 cents of every dollar received by Lake County automatically gets distributed out to our local communities. We run the county on 11 cents of every dollar. 11 cents. So the monies are just not there. Faith Andrews, clerk of court, was kind enough to commit, based on her analysis of existing revenues and anticipated future revenues from the certificate of title, she was willing to declare surplus funding in order to pay for this annually for 4 years. That's incredibly generous. That's within her authority. Although those dollars then go to the general fund, there would be an understanding that they would go to this grant program. I do not know what more we can do. This isn't a game show. You can't play let's make a deal. This is serious. So I would hope that our trustees would work with us. As you've indicated, I'm sure Commissioner Young would also advocate for this. If there's a way to loosen up these dollars that the townships are now receiving. And I think it bears repeating, at the expense of the cities. The cities and villages, I have to say that. The cities and villages were counting on X number of dollars. That money has been reduced and is going to the townships. I think this is a tremendous opportunity for the township to step up and say, okay, let's work on this bridging idea. Let's acknowledge that we have a serious need for law enforcement, and that law enforcement needs to be taken care of with the same respect and diligence that roads, fire, and EMS have been taken care of. And let's be blunt. Again, as we've said several times during this meeting, we have townships that are bigger than most of our cities and bigger than all of our villages. So, Commissioner Young, Commissioner Plechnik, anything further?
I just like to say, hopefully, in closing here, that it's great that we know where one another stand on this issue. It's great to hear from the sheriff. I spoke with some of the trustees as well, a number of times about the issue, but not recently. So I think it'd be good if we would consider reaching out to them once again, maybe through our Commissioner of Commissioners, our esteemed Jason Boyd, and I mean that, esteemed Jason Boyd. Perhaps he could spend some time with them and get back to us on this issue.
Fair enough.
I think that's very prudent.
There you go, Jason, clean this thing up for us. Let the record show that was a thumbs up. So. Okay, all right, that being said, is there any other new business? Oh, I'm sorry, well, that we're still in old business. Good heavens, that was old business. Any other old business? Okay, moving on to new business. I would like to share this Saturday, my wife Susan and I had the honor of attending and being in support of Summit for Soldiers. It was a wonderful event. The last event was, they called it Clay Therapy. Basically, it was a outdoor shooting activity, shooting clays, doing range activities. But the backstory had to do with raising awareness and through encouragement and veterans working together with veterans and people such as us just being there and supportive and saying thank you and letting them know that they're not forgotten, because post-traumatic stress disorder and suicide are very real issues, and it's a very difficult topic, but the bottom line is we've lost more of our warriors through suicide than in combat and combat-related activities, and that's an ongoing program or problem. I know Commissioner Young regularly talks about our suicides related to opioids and all of the addiction challenges, and this is very, very similar. Many of these veterans, I'll just say, self-medicate. They do things just to cope, and it's tough living in a society. But we also got introduced to an interesting organization, Healing Waters. It's a national program. One of the big things they do is fly fishing, and something that we got a lot of people who travel here to Lake County from other states and even internationally. Apparently, we are like the nexus of steelhead here on the southern shore of Lake Erie, right here in Lake County, and there's actually a branch right here in Willoughby. Good people. I think it's well worth taking a look and referring folks to, but it's all about awareness, and that's sometimes you have to have those difficult discussions. You have to get the message out there. They sent some bling along here, so I've got some patches and some wristbands, but a lot of it, again, the emphasis, awareness, which goes right along with communications and adventure therapy. Summit for Soldiers started out as mountain climbing and doing other skilled and a little bit of adrenaline junkie stuff there. I will freely admit that tends to get your focus going. But they've grown, they've expanded. They're kind of reforming themselves. They always adjust to the needs. And the same thing again with Healing Waters. Again, complementary groups, complementary programs, but it all comes down to taking care of our veterans and the stresses that they have to deal with on a daily basis. But I would encourage that we give thought to this, because it's also, again, I'd like to throw this out there, from an economic development perspective, bringing people here to Ohio and especially Lake County, that's really good, because the veterans also bring their family members and their friends. So there's a lot of opportunities there. So there's a lot of connections that may not be obvious, but are very real nonetheless. If I could get to the meeting, I'll give you guys some bling and tchotchkes here, but if you got any thoughts or questions on that then, gentlemen? Okay. All right, let's see. With that, do we have any other new business to come before the board?
Mr. President, I think it just bears saying congratulations to Andrew Meinhold on his reappointment to the Adams Board, and special congratulations to Kurt Lau on his appointment to Adams Board. For veterans and for all people, mental health is a serious issue, and our Adams Board is the funding mechanism for so much of the good work that's done in Lake County. So I'm grateful to Mr. Meinhold and Mr. Lau for their upcoming service over the next 4 years in dealing with these issues, supporting our veterans and supporting all residents who wrestle with these issues.
Excellent point. Thank you, sir. Okay, if there's no other new business, this brings us to our second public comment portion. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to address the board? Indicating none. Jason Boyd, do we have any electronic submissions? Okay, Jason's indicating that he does.
Yes, Commissioner, we have one public comment that came in a little bit ago. This is from Terry Foreman, 2405 Bunker Lane, Willoughby, Ohio. Good morning, Commissioners. Would you please comment on the current status of the proposed county jail retrofit/renewal project process? End quote.
Ongoing. Sheriff, is that adequate? Ongoing? There you go.
Mr. President, I would just say our next step is going to be to continue to review the budget, look at different bidding alternatives. We do have an informational meeting scheduled with a Kirtland resident and attorney who's going to look at bidding alternatives. So when we say ongoing, we mean we're looking at what the beginning of the process would be to provide the most fiscally responsible solution for the long-term the long-term use of the jail. And as the resident stated, that's comparing the relative costs of a refit to building a new jail. And I won't go further than that in the interest of standing between people and their lunch, but that's what ongoing means. It means more homework and research are being diligently done by the county staff and commissioners.
And just a point of clarification, bidding systems also be delivery systems and delivery methods. That's, just get all those terms of art in there. I'm looking over at legal on that one, so. Commissioner Young?
We're also bringing up some folks from the state to give us some input as well.
Agreed. So hopefully that effectively answers that question. Jason, any additional? Indicating no additional? Thank you. Okay, this brings us to the conclusion of our meeting. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
We were ready.
None being heard. Madam Clerk, roll call, please.
Commissioner Plechnik.
Yes.
Commissioner Young.
Yes.
Commissioner Hammercheck.
Yes, thank you. This meeting stands